It began with whispers in late 2019, a series of quiet meetings, an undercurrent of strategic ambition,
A race to secure precious resources.
and a narrative that stretched from Washington to Kyiv. At the center, former US President Donald Trump, amid swirling impeachment proceedings, and a young Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, eager to stabilize his country. Clues about a looming deal on rare earth minerals began to surface. Rumors piled up. Official confirmations were scarce. But one detail seemed certain. These talks touched on Ukraine's trove of lithium, titanium, and other elements vital to modern technology. Some insiders framed it as a pragmatic effort to reduce US dependence on China. Others saw a more shadowy agenda, potentially leveraging military aid in exchange for strategic mineral rights. The media fanned the flames. Politicians sparred. Experts weighed in. A swirl of documents, some classified, fueled speculation. The story grew, threading through closed-door sessions, hushed phone calls, and cryptic statements on both sides. Ukraine's mineral wealth had long enticed global powers. Deposits lay scattered in the Donbas region, Kirovohrad, Poltava, and beyond. For years, conflict and political instability stifled large-scale extraction. Western investors remained wary. Infrastructure was strained, especially in war-torn areas. Yet estimates painted a dazzling picture. Billions of dollars in untapped value, enough to drive new industries, feed high-tech sectors, and bolster national defense. The potential to break China's near monopoly on certain rare earth exports was no small thing. American energy firms and defense contractors eyed Ukraine's resources with increasing intensity. Talk of forging a partnership that benefited both Kyiv's economy and Washington's strategic interests took hold. But at what price? Could Ukraine safeguard its sovereignty, or risk being seen as a mere resource pit? President Zelensky, having campaigned on reform and integrity, knew any perceived concession to foreign interests might spark backlash at home. By early 2020, the Trump-Ukraine rare minerals deal was no longer just a rumor, but a topic of occasional congressional chatter. Some testimonies hinted that American lobbyists pushed for access to Ukrainian mineral fields. Others suggested a broader context, tying these negotiations to the impeachment drama over Trump's communication with Zelensky. The specter of a quid pro quo hovered, military aid for political or economic favors. Official statements were tight-lipped. U.S. agencies like the Department of Commerce and the Department of Defense published urgent assessments highlighting the need for secure mineral supplies, especially rare earths. Headlines about Chinese export controls rattled tech industries. The timing fueled speculation. Critics accused the administration of overstepping. Supporters framed it as wise policy. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, lawmakers debated the pros and cons of letting foreign entities tap into national treasures. Environmentalists raised red flags about ecosystem damage. Local communities feared exploitation or corruption. Zelensky publicly reassured the nation, investment is welcome, but Ukraine would never be a pawn. When Trump left office in January 2021, many assumed the deal would fade. A new U.S. administration meant shifting priorities. Yet whispers persisted that certain Trump allies continued to nurture the arrangement. Private sector figures, apparently undeterred, kept lines of communication open. Ukraine itself still needed economic investment, especially as conflict with Russian-backed separatists flared anew. International competitors lurked, including European and Chinese firms. And so the seeds planted under Trump's tenure remained. By 2023, talk of a Trump-backed initiative re-emerged. News outlets in Kyiv reported a revised proposal, a revenue-sharing plan granting U.S. entities up to half the proceeds from mining operations. In return, Ukraine would receive military assistance, advanced technology transfers, and better access to Western markets. That detail 50% set off alarms. The Verkhovna Rada erupted in debates. Some hailed the potential for quick capital infusion. Others called it a brazen giveaway. Zelensky's administration found itself squeezed. On one side, the lure of development and defense support. On the other, national pride and fear of foreign overreach. Leaked cables in 2024 hinted at an impasse. Ukrainian negotiators pressed for written security guarantees. The Americans demanded legislative reforms that would smooth the path for U.S. firms. Tensions climbed. Protests broke out in several Ukrainian cities. Students and activists decried the possibility of tying resources to military support. Labor unions warned about workers' rights under foreign-controlled extraction. The memory of earlier corruption scandals fanned public distrust. Yet negotiations pressed on. Behind the scenes, phone calls and discreet meetings continued, often in neutral European locales. By early 2025, insiders hinted that a draft agreement sat on the table. If signed, it promised billions in investment over a decade, new infrastructure projects, and a significant U.S. presence in Ukraine's mining sector. But half of the net income would flow to American entities. Officials in Kyiv bristled. That demanded ratio was too steep. In parallel, the conflict in eastern Ukraine raged on, complicating any large-scale industrial expansion. Investors wanted stability. Russia's shadow loomed. Then came a new twist. Despite being out of the White House, Trump made statements lauding the pursuit of Ukrainian minerals. Critics saw it as a bid to remain relevant on the global stage, or perhaps nurture future political ambitions. Zelensky, for his part, aimed to secure a fair deal, repeatedly emphasizing Ukraine's right to self-determination. As February 2025 dawned, rumor had it that no final signature had been inked. Journalists speculated daily on the outcome. The sense of urgency was clear. Demand for rare minerals soared worldwide. Electric cars, wind turbines, modern weapons, each required specialized elements. A post-war Ukraine, if stable, could become a key player. The question, how to finalize a plan that balanced Ukraine's economic needs with its sovereignty. Could this be a strategic partnership or a path to exploitation? Observers braced for answers. Environmental groups insisted on stringent regulations. Local communities demanded job security and profit sharing. Politicians walked a fine line between courting foreign investors and preserving national integrity. Suddenly, fresh reports emerged that a breakthrough was near. It happened almost without warning. A Ukrainian official claimed everything unacceptable was taken out of the text, and the deal now more clearly spelt out how this agreement will contribute to Ukraine's security and peace. Word spread that Zelensky would soon travel to Washington, D.C. Details remained elusive, but this new arrangement went beyond mere mineral access. It wove in discussions about ending Russia's invasion and establishing a reconstruction fund for Ukraine's decimated infrastructure. Could it really be the pivot point that brought the war closer to a conclusion? Or was it another partial measure, overshadowed by continued hostilities on the ground? The question loomed large. Skeptics recalled that earlier drafts demanded a $500 billion share of Ukraine's minerals in exchange for U.S. aid. That figure had been unpalatable to Zelensky. Now apparently the text had changed. Trump, in an Oval Office appearance, mentioned a figure of $350 billion plus lots of equipment, military equipment, and the right to fight on. The ambiguous phrase raised eyebrows. Journalists pressed for clarity. The White House offered little. In one breath, Trump hinted at having spoken with Russia, claiming Moscow had no objection to the plan. Some found that notion incredulous. Why would the Kremlin consent to a deal that potentially strengthens Ukraine's defenses and finances? Trump exuded confidence, suggesting that once the agreement was final, Russia wouldn't dare move back in. European leaders, meanwhile, insisted on robust security guarantees for Kyiv. President Emmanuel Macron praised Trump's willingness to strike a deal on rare earths, but stressed the need for a durable peace. Macron even floated the idea of deploying French and British troops as peacekeepers if requested. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, slated for a White House visit, advocated a U.S. backstop for any settlement. That might include intelligence cooperation, air support, and heavy lift transport. The war's toll on Ukraine was relentless. Even as talks of a prospective deal gained steam, Russian airstrikes continued. One massive drone barrage saw 177 drones launched, 110 shot down, 66 failing to reach targets, yet 7 people still died, underscoring how fragile the situation remained. The prospective accord hinged on 2 main pillars: reconstruction and resources. Zelensky had long argued that any arrangement must contain concrete measures to protect Ukraine from future aggression. If American funds were to rebuild destroyed cities and shattered infrastructure, Kyiv needed ironclad commitments that a rearmed Russia wouldn't lay waste to them again. Early drafts apparently lacked direct American obligations. That, sources said, was a non-starter for Zelensky. He refused to sign away Ukraine's mineral wealth without binding guarantees. Now it seemed the language might have shifted. CNN reported that the thorniest details about resource sharing would be tackled in subsequent negotiations, while the immediate text addressed baseline commitments. A modular approach, analysts called it. Tie down what can be agreed upon, then iron out the rest later. Critics in the US attacked the notion of tying any financial or military aid to resource acquisitions. They argued the United States had already provided substantial support to Ukraine under NATO and humanitarian frameworks. Why demand a slice of rare earths or lithium fields as compensation? Proponents countered that a stable Ukraine, well-funded and allied with Western interests, would serve global security. The cost of reconstruction was astronomical. If private capital was to foot some of the bill, resource concessions might be the inevitable trade-off. Public opinion in Ukraine was mixed. War fatigue weighed heavily. People needed hope, needed infrastructure repaired, needed foreign investment. Yet the mention of colonial-like deals stirred a nationalist backlash. Zelensky sought a middle ground, mindful that any final text would face fierce scrutiny in parliament. As Zelensky prepared to embark on his journey to Washington, details of the prospective signing ceremony circulated. Trump, apparently eager for a high-profile diplomatic success, hinted at a handshake in the Oval Office. Cameras flashing. A pledge to rebuild Ukraine while enabling it to defend itself. The war had made Zelensky a symbol of resistance, and a high-stakes meeting with Trump, still a polarizing figure, captured global attention. Yet the reality on the ground was stark. Drone and missile attacks battered Ukrainian cities almost nightly. Civilians were exhausted. Soldiers fought on multiple fronts, some in resource-rich areas that might soon attract foreign mining companies. The notion of discussing multi-billion-dollar commercial projects while bombs fell was jarring. But perhaps, some believed, a significant agreement might nudge the conflict toward resolution. European capitals also watched closely. France's Macron and Britain's Starmer emphasized that any final arrangement must ensure Ukraine's future security. That could mean a multinational force to enforce a ceasefire, or robust arms deliveries, or advanced early warning systems. Without such provisions, many worried that a resource deal would be meaningless in the face of renewed Russian aggression. Trump's mention that Russia didn't seem to have a problem with it struck many analysts as simplistic. Moscow's strategic calculus was rarely so transparent. Still, the White House maintained that a stable, prosperous Ukraine, backed by Western powers, would deter any further attacks. By this point, the entire saga, originating in the hush of 2019 discussions, overshadowed by impeachment inquiries, revived in multiple drafts, and culminating in a rumored 2025 sign-off, had become emblematic of how resource competition, military conflict, and political ambition intersect in modern geopolitics. For Ukraine, battered by relentless assaults, time was running short. Infrastructure lay in ruins, millions displaced. The promise of billions in reconstruction funds, alongside a potential security umbrella, offered a lifeline. That it might come with a steep mineral concession package was the trade-off many were willing to consider, provided sovereignty remained intact. No official word from Moscow clarified whether the Kremlin truly accepted the arrangement. Skeptics predicted that, if finalized, the deal could inflame tensions. Others argued it might serve as part of a broader settlement that tamped down hostilities. No one expected a swift end to the conflict simply because of a resource accord. But if it symbolized deeper Western commitment to Ukraine's future, it might shift Russia's calculations. Zelensky's government, determined to retake lost territory, saw little alternative but to push for every advantage. Meanwhile, local activists cautioned against ignoring environmental safeguards. They pressed for stringent regulations to ensure foreign mining operations did not wreak havoc on Ukrainian soil. In the final analysis, the Trump-Ukraine rare minerals deal, once just a footnote to a controversial phone call, had evolved into a central bargaining chip in the quest for peace and rebuilding. The world waited to see if, upon Zelensky's arrival in Washington, the handshake would materialize. Would there be cameras capturing that moment, or would 11th-hour disputes derail the signing? Could the final text be enforceable? Would it truly guarantee Ukraine's security, or end up another compromised document overshadowed by harsh realities on the battlefield? Answers remained elusive. For now, Ukrainian officials exuded cautious optimism. They spoke of a milestone agreement that tied reconstruction and resource development to the crucial task of ending a brutal war. Yet the bombs still fell, the drones still buzzed overhead, and the fundamental question, who truly benefits and at what lasting cost, lingered in the minds of many, both in Ukraine and beyond.